Okay. Hey guys. Sorry about that. Welcome back to Getting in Tune. Um, I am your host, as always, Aaron Lynch. And, figuring I talked about, in past episodes, some general topics. Um, yeah, I thought I'd, for the first time, rattle off some of my favorite music, which I think would be cool. So, today's all about me. So I've attempted, this originally was going to be my, favorite of all time sort of thing. Then I thought of three more, and so, like, well, I definitely can't put those on the list. Then I was like, well, I can't have 13. So favorites of all time, without a doubt. Um, I'll probably end up throwing some like honorable mentions on here too. We'll see, because there are just literally way too many albums that I had to leave off because there just have been way too many. And I didn't really think I ended up ranking these two from out of 20 favorite out of all of them. I didn't think that would be a test I would be able to tackle, but I did. And really at any time when albums could, you know, switch on the list. I think the one I came up with is pretty solid. Plus, like I said, I think this is good because you'll be able to get a better understanding of what music I like to listen to rather than just, rock music. I mean, it's all rock music, but more specifically what I'm into. So these albums are my all-time favorite, to say the least. Um, when I have no idea what I'm gonna listen to, when I have no idea what to listen to, I usually end up listening to something right on here. So um, these albums are pretty important to me. Um, and all these albums are important to me, and there's a difference in liking a song or an album or an artist in general than having a song, you know, or album make you actually feel some. I mean, I guess those go hand in hand, but you know, all of these albums, when I've listened to them, pretty much became synonymous with the time, with the time that I listened to them. It's every time I listen to one of these albums, I go back to the first time I listened to all of them. They have that sort of importance to me, and aside from that, it's just really good music. And also, you know, these are recommendations too. I think these albums are pretty great. So if we on the list here, my number 20 have by the Grateful Dead. I don't know a lot about the Grateful Dead. Um, I mean, I have listened to um, I don't know really, band's history and stuff like that. I don't really know. I'm not a Deadhead. I'll put it that way. But I mean, that whole run of 70s albums they put out, Working Man's Dead, American Beauty, um, Terror Station, Blues for Allah, all that stuff. This is great. I mean, I've listened to all of them. Um, and out of all of them, American Beauty, I mean, American Beauty is really, I think, out of those albums, like Jerry Garcia's best and Robert Hunter's best songwriting out of that whole era. You had songs like Box of Rain and Ripple and Friend of the Devil is probably my favorite Grateful Dead song. And then Truckin', that close the album. It's just an amazing album. I feel like this is an album that Grateful Dead gets a bad rap from their haters, obviously, that they're a jam band and their songs are pretty long, and it's tough seeing them live because they drag on these songs for you know 20 minutes or something like that, something crazy like that. But American Beauty is really a just this peaceful album, folk, but super catchy. Um, really just a song on the background, doing kind of fit the mood of any. I don't know how you would put all acoustic guitars, um, happy, happy songs like that, but I'm gonna like my next one, Dirt by Alice in Chains. Um, I mean, the name Alice in Chains should tell you that it's not you know, band by much of the image, but Dirt, my number 19, that came out in 1991. Like I said, man, Alice, and this album is pretty great. I mean, all these are great, but this one is definitely probably out of all of these albums, the absolute darkest. I mean, it's probably one of the most depressing albums you can ever hear. Alice in Chains, I don't know what you would really categorize them as. They're sort of on that border of hard rock and heavy metal. A lot of people consider them metal, but I wouldn't. They do have a lot of Sabbath elements to their music, Black Sabbath elements, but I don't know if I would go as far to say they're heavy metal. They are a grunge band. Um, However, they don't really sound like many other grunge bands. Well, I mean, I shouldn't really say, grunge isn't really a genre. It was a time period. It wasn't a style of music really, because all the bands sounded drastically different from one another. Nirvana sounded nothing like Soundgarden. Soundgarden sounded nothing like Pearl Jam. None of these bands sounded the same. So grunge really isn't. You can't label any of those bands as as grunge as a style of music. But Alice in Chains is definitely the head out of all of the grunge bands for sure. Dirt is really just so it's so dark. The album opens with uh, it's about 2.5 minutes, and it's probably the heaviest song. You know, every single time I put that album on, the beginning scares me because if you know them bones, it it jumps at you pretty quick. And that song's in a pretty weird time signature too. It's in I believe it's in 7/4. It's either in 7/4 or 3/4. I can't remember. Um, but that's bones. And then you have songs on it like um, Rain When I Die and Down in a Hole and Angry Chair. Angry Chair is awesome. That one was written by the singer Lane Staley, who unfortunately passed away in 2001, 2002. He was heavily addicted to drugs, as were many of those guys at the time, and they were all severely depressed too. And you can tell, when you listen to an album like Dirt, it's extremely just it's a really sad album, and you can tell what where their minds were at the time. Um, they weren't happy people. Um, but then you had songs like Rooster and Wood, which were definitely probably the biggest hits the band ever had. That in a nutshell came a few years later, which was I'd say probably their biggest hit. But Rooster and Wood, probably the band's biggest hits are off of that album. All the songs were written by, except for a few, which were written by Lane Staley, but you have the singer. Um, all the songs written by the guitarist Jerry Cantrell. And Alice in Chains, I'm actually going to see Alice in Chains this Friday, and I want to talk about them next time in more detail. But Alice in Chains are pretty much known for their vocal harmonies, which are like pretty much every song you'll hear Jerry Cantrell, the guitarist, vocalizing. I mean, harmonizing with the vocalist Lane Staley. These are, I believe, fourth. Um, for you. Not too sure, but that's and it really gives that extremely set heavy, but it's it's heavy. It's like I said, there's a lot of Sabbath elements you'll find on the album, and just a great album. Speaking of Sabbath, my number 18 is Black Sabbath's third album, Master of Reality. This is my favorite Black Sabbath album. When I say it's their best, I don't think that would be a stretch. Even though uh, their second album, Paranoid, is revered as the best by most. which I get. I probably agree with that. Um, but Master of Reality came out in 1971. Paranoid came out in 70, and I think their first album also came out in 70. So they had 3 albums out um, within the first 2 years they were a band. And their third is honestly each album they got more. They got better in my opinion, even though their second's considered the best. Master of Reality has a pretty interesting pattern to it. I don't know if a lot of people pick up on it, but what the album does is they open with 2 pretty heavy dark tracks. You had Sweet Leaf, which opened the album. Um, Amazing guitar riff. That touches on stoner metal. And then you had After Forever, which came right after that. But what the album does after that, it I think it's pretty smart. What it does is you had these 2 heavy songs, then you had a slow song, then you had another heavy song, then you had a slow song after that, and then you with the song. Obviously, listening on vinyl, does it all be broken up, having this from side A to side B. But when you listen to the album, it just had this just incredible flow. And like Dirt, this is an extremely dark album. I mean, that was pretty much Black Sabbath's thing at the time. They, they only have a minute at the time. That was their thing. Had songs like Children of Eve best at this point. So was Sweet Leaf. He had songs like Into the Void, which is the album, which is just this came out in 71, around 1991. Into the Void is almost heavier than anything that came after that. I mean, that's an insanely heavy track. I think the guitar tuning is drop C sharp, which is pretty low. They were using that stuff on Tony Iommi, the guitarist of Black Sabbath. He's one of the best. But he was doing that stuff back in the 70s. It's crazy how that was for such early work. But that's Master. You had a song, a great song on that album is Solitude, which is really, if you're sad, listen to Solitude by Black Sabbath. That is, I mean, that song will hit you. That's a really moody, um, track. I mean, but after Master of Reality, we have we're at 17, an album that came out in 1967 by a band that featured one of the greatest guitarists of all time, who we talked about, Eric Clapton. His second band, Cream, which I mean only disbanded in 1960, 68 maybe. But their second album, which came out in 67, which followed their first album, Fresh Cream. Their second album was called Disraeli Gears. Um, and that's probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest um, uh, pieces of psychedelic rock, if not the greatest that there ever was. That pretty much defines psychedelic rock, Cream and Jimi Hendrix. But it's all blues. The whole album, the whole band was just blues players, their blues songs, guitar that really, it, um, that's a great album opener. And then right after that, you have a song to play classic rock radio today. Has a top 3 greatest guitar, Johnny. Um, you know that and the album, you have songs like that's a moody song. It's a dark song for sure. Songs Taylor Brave Ulysses and World of Pain and Outside Woman Blues. What Cream used to do a lot, which I actually really like, for when songwriting, they would team up with poets. You could tell because if you read their lyrics, they're pretty out there. I mean, that's what kind of gave them that whole um, yeah, the lyrics are very they're pretty I mean, there's something else. But I like the fact that they were like that, and they used actual poets to write most of their lyrics. For the um, that's something that really that's a great characteristic of that band is that they really I mean, they were all great songwriters, but they weren't afraid to team up with other people like a lot of bands were, and a lot of solo artists were. And I don't think Cream has that reputation of like, oh, they needed outside songwriters because they didn't. You had, I mean, Eric Clapton was in the band, and he's a phenomenal songwriter. And we'll talk about him again in a few minutes, but you know, Cream was just an amazing band. And you know, I think I mentioned it before, but Cream was a band that was revered by most musicians at the time. Jimi Hendrix loved Cream. Pete Townsend loved Cream. Everybody loved Cream. They were influencing, you know, people that would be influencing other people. They influenced Jimi Hendrix. They influenced Jimmy Page. They influenced all those guys, and that's a pretty cool thing. So that's Disraeli Gears, psychedelic album, 1967, Cream, great band, great album. Um, about 13 years later, 14 maybe, I think it was 1981, a band called Rush came out with the album Moving Pictures. This is definitely Rush's, I mean, magnum opus for sure. People consider that to be Some people consider that to be 2112, which I understand, but it sort of just came together on this songwriting, musicianship, just everything, and per like it all came. I mean, they were going up and up for a long time, and they finally reached the peak with um, Moving Pictures. Um, and the album before this, Permanent Waves, could have been on the list too, but I mean, you really just can't beat I mean, the album opens with Tom Sawyer, which I could give or take. I've again, that's a song that's played on classic rock radio every day for the most part, so I've heard that a few too many times. But the rest of the album, Red Barchetta is probably my favorite Rush song. That's the second song on there. YYZ is incredible. That's an instrumental. That's just, I mean, it's mind blowing. Um, the album closes with Vital, which I never loved that song. I mean, I found to it for sure. But that's definitely like that's a movie. Um, Tap into more. Um, um, Honestly. They're starting to use like keyboard. Album, I wouldn't say the album was keyboard driven, but they were. Um, each album after that got more and more reliant on the keyboards. Um, like even the album right after that, Signals, they had a song on that called Subdivision, which is just that's an awesome song. But you really can't hear any guitar on it at all. It's kind of they were going in that direction that a lot of bands were going in the 80s, especially being such a house 70s hard rock band. Where they're trying to adapt with on music at the time. And a lot of bands doing it. Van Halen was the same way. They were you know heavy metal band for it, and 1994, which we're going to talk about that too. You know, they started to rely on synths and keyboards way more often than some members feel like they should have and that did cause some problems, but that's neither there. Van Halen, but Rush didn't. So it's that you could consider it the beginning of the end for the you know for what it is. I mean, like there's you start to hear things that weren't on other Rush albums before that, like keyboards and like a ton of stuff. They were definitely experimenting on the album for sure, and they pulled it all off. But you can tell that you know they were going in a direction that they hadn't gone in before. But Moving Pictures is an amazing album. It's not as progressive as some of their previous albums, like Hemispheres and A Farewell to Kings, which had these 14-minute songs on it and things like that. Moving Pictures has it has a 10-minute song on it, but it's not this super complex thing. The song is The Camera Eye, and it's a pretty catchy. The whole album is like really catchy and you know heavy, too. But it's pretty catchy and it's a fun album. It's just great. And like I said, like the musicianship on that album is just you can't really beat that. Rush is Rush. I mean, they're hard to they're a hard band to explain because they're a pretty weird band. But that was Moving Pictures. Number 15 is see, this is happening again, pretty much in the complete opposite direction. Moondance by Van Morrison. That came out in 1970. It might have been 1970 actually. I think it came out in 70. Um, this is a perfect album, front to back. Those albums that I think you can listen to. It's probably one of those out there. You can't really person sounds like you'll know any song of his. I mean, you'll know it's him singing when you hear it. But Moondance is a perfect album. It opens with "And It Stoned Me," which I think is probably my favorite Van Morrison song. Could definitely be. Of course, you got Moondance after that, which is another amazing song. He's tapping into a little jazz on that song. Speaking of jazz, the album followed up. Um, I believe Moondance was his third album, maybe third or fourth, but it followed up either his second or third album, which was Astral Week, which actually pretty anti jazz. You heard the stand up bass in there, and all that stuff. And the songs are pretty. They're. Um, I mean, compared to what was on Moondance, they were a little weird. They were pretty. Um, more complex, and the songs were longer, and songwriting was a little dance. And Astral Weeks could have 100% been on this list. Astral Weeks, I think, is just as good as Moondance. However, Moondance is, I'd say, a more poppy record. The songs are much simpler, much shorter. Um, Even learning some of the songs on guitar, they're really surprised. I'm surprised. I mean, how great the quality of these songs are. Knowing how simple they are, um, and that just goes to show you he's a great songwriter. Any songwriter, great songwriters, great. They could take a simple piece of music and just make it. You know, but Moondance is great. To the Mystic, which is revered as probably one of his best songs. He had Crazy Love on there, which is another one of my favorite Van Morrison songs. That has to be one of the most just romantic songs out there. And then songs like Everyone and Glad Tidings and These Dreams of You, all great, great 70s sort of folky pop stuff. And it's, I feel like any fan of music can appreciate that album without a doubt. So that was Moondance. And then after that, we have um, an album called Let It Bleed by one of the greatest, who are considered one of the greatest bands of all time. Uh, knows being that band that would rivaling. Um, I don't really understand that. I don't really see it. They're actually pretty friendly with each other, but the Rolling Stones and the Beatles were two incredibly different bands. I have no Beatles albums on this list, by the way. So that's not saying I don't like the Beatles. It's not saying I don't appreciate the Beatles, but I like all these albums pretty much better than any Beatles album. That I'm not a Beatles fan, but it's just I'm more of a Stones guy myself. And you can compare those two bands really at all. But Let It Bleed, I think, is the Stones. I think that's their best album. I was debating whether I'd put Let It Bleed, or Let It Bleed came out in '68, or their '73 album, Exile on Main Street. Um, and I was re-listening to them, and Exile on Main Street's a double album, so there's, like 15 songs on it or something like it, maybe more, I don't even remember. But, on an album like that, a really long album, you're gonna have those songs that are just, you know, not that they're misses, it's just that, okay, I could skip this song to get to, the next one, or, this album isn't like that. It's a short album, um, probably 40, uh, and it's one of those albums where these albums where every song is just amazing. I mean, the album opens with "Gimme Shelter," which, I mean, that's just that's that's one of their best, if not their best. Closes with, um, "You Can't Always Get What You Want." So literally 2 of their greatest songs bookend this album, um, and everything in between is, in my opinion, just as good. You had songs like, "Country Honk," which ended up becoming, a few years later, "Honky Tonk Women," which is a great song, but I think "Country Honk" is just as good. Um, "Honky Tonk Women" was a single. Um, and then you had songs like, "Live With Me," which, I mean, if you're a bass player, like, listen to "Live With Me" by the Rolling Stones, and, learn that. That's a really, really cool bass line, but, and then you had the title track, "Let It Bleed." Again, an amazing song. One of my actually 2 songs, on this album that I think are 2 extremely underrated Rolling Stones songs are, Monkey Man and, You Got the Silver. Monkey Man is this really cool, sort of moody, I don't know, I don't know how you explain Monkey Man. I feel like you need to be driving around, you know, at night when the stars are out, your windows down. Um, that's when you should listen to Monkey Man. It's just, I don't know, that's probably sounds weird, but that's just, it's a vibe, as the kids would say. The song is a vibe. Um, and then you had a song like "You Got the Silver," which is not sung by Mick Jagger, as are most Rolling Stone songs. It's sung by the guitarist Keith Richards. Um, and he has a pretty interesting voice. I like it. It's definitely not as good as Mick Jagger's, obviously. There's 2 songs on the album that have his voice. Um, and that's very, bluesy, very acoustic song. It's great. One of the best on the album. A lot of people don't talk about it, and you got the best songs on the album. Um, You Got the Silver's a great track. It's only like 2 minutes or something like that, but, you know, um, that's Let It Bleed. Just an amazing, amazing piece of work by, the Rolling Stones. And then after that you had Beggar's Banquet, um, which is considered equally as good. I think Let It Bleed is not much better, but I think it's definitely better. Um, and then all their stuff throughout the '70s too is just great. You had, Sticky Fingers and, um, Exile on Main Street, and, um, all that stuff. Even later with Some Girls, and, albums like that. They're just great. You can't really beat the Stones. Still going to this day, so good for them. After that, I mentioned this band before. This is number 14, 1984 by, Van Halen. I was gonna do their first album, but I was going through the track listings on each record, and for some reason, just, I don't know, like, don't get me wrong, Van Halen 1's a much heavier album, and, that's usually what I gravitate towards most of the time, but, 1984, just, I don't know, that's one of those albums that really makes me feel something. Every song, I just get, sort of those butter feelings in my, I don't know why, but, they just all have a certain mood and vibe to all of them. Um, of course, you got the hits like "Jump" and "Panama" and, "Hot for Teacher," great, and, you know, and, but, I think "I'll Wait" is one of my favorite songs. It's not my favorite, and it's all keyboard driven, it's all synth driven. Um, which again, a lot of people were against at the time, but they were writing great songs, and Eddie Van Halen's a genius. So I don't know what you want me to say about that. Um, but All Wait is definitely a highlight of the album for me. And then the album closes with House of Pain, which like on an album that's considered, not nearly their heaviest, that's definitely easily one of their heaviest songs they've ever released. That song is crazy intense. Um, House of Pain's awesome, and then you had Drop Dead Legs and um, like I said, Panama and Girl Gone Bad and great album. Top Jimmy, great album. 1984. Um, I'd say it's just as good as their first album. Those two for their best albums. So 1984 is my number 13. My number 12 is Slow Hand by Eric Clapton. We came out in 76, 77, um, one of the two. And Clapton is, talked about him a bunch. One of the greatest guitarists of all time. This isn't really, I wouldn't go on the record, think it's, heavy like a Cream sort of record. It's definitely, I'd even go as far as it's pretty much a pop record for what the songs are. You had heavy songs on it for the most part, like Cocaine, and the core is like, oh, that riff is awesome in the core, but everything else on it is a pop tune for the most part, and it's excuse me, but I think that his songwriting really, I mean, that was sort of his peak. Not that he went, too far downhill from there, but like that was really that's his best. That's the best thing he's ever released as a solo artist. I mean, some people will say the MTV Unplugged thing, which can't really count that. It's a live album. I don't know, but I I wasn't a fan of that. But Slow Hand is definitely Clapton's best piece of work, I think. Solo piece of work. If you're talking about his best piece of work, has to be Disraeli Gears probably, or Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs. That's a great album too. That could have made it on here, but yeah, 12 is Slow Hand, and then 11, an album not many people talk about. I shouldn't say that, but it's a band not many people talk about or consider. You know, they're never in the talk of the greatest bands of all time. Not that they necessarily should be, but it's like I never hear them mentioned enough. But the album is by Cheap Trick, which came out in 1979. I love this album. I listened to this album for the first time this year, actually. I can't even I've listened to it since. It's just, oh, it's a great album, front to back. Rock ballad. He got this like, I think it's like a 9 minute or 8 minute song. How to describe that song? I mean, it's also like a dance. All bands were hopping on that disc. I don't know. Gun Race Hell was definitely like I don't know. It's so heavy, and it's so like infectious with its groove and its beat. Gonna Race Hell is a great song. And then you had tunes like the title track, Dream Police, which is just this awesome anthemic. Probably, I think it's probably, I'd say it's objectively, Cheap Trick's best song. Some Surrender, I Want You to Want Me. I think it's Dream Police, without a doubt. But that was number 11, Dream Police. I think that's Rick Nielsen's best. That's definitely his greatest song right there. Because he writes all the music, and Robin Zander sounds incredible as he always does. He's probably one of my favorite singers of the '70s, at least. And yeah, great album, Dream Police by Cheap Trick. Okay, we're into the top 10 now, and these are all albums that mean a ton to me. I mean, all of these albums do, but especially these ones. So number 10 is the debut album from the Cars, which is just, this is like like Moondance, Van Morrison. Not that they're similar in, musical styles or whatever, but it's an album that I just think everybody would like, or everybody does like, The Cars are just that band in general. It's like all their songs are just like they're just everybody can listen to it and like it. It's like Tom Petty. It's like who doesn't like Tom Petty? Everybody likes Tom Petty. The Cars are the same way, especially this album. Good Times Roll is probably um I'd say objectively their best song. It's like 3 chords, but it's like the catchiest and moodiest you know yeah, just like uh um but just what I needed. Um you had that whole second much, songs bled into um also, it's like a sort of pop album. And um his songwriting is pretty, simplistic for what it is, but it's one of those things that just, like I said, it just gets across to everybody and it just works. It's such um the whole album is just it has such a great mood to it and such a great vibe. Um on that note, um I guess I should say on the contrary, the next album is Blue by Joni Mitchell. Um Not that this album doesn't have a great vibe, it's just a very sad album. Um, and this album, the first time I listened to it, just this is one of those albums that just it just blew my mind for the most part. Just with how raw and sort of intense all the songs were. The whole album's so sad. The album's called Blue, so it's pretty much about being blue. And Joni Mitchell is just has one of my favorite voices ever. Oh my god, her voice is just beautiful and so, it really hits you whenever she sings, and um her songwriting is just, you know, out of what I've heard from Joni Mitchell, nothing beats Blue in terms of her songwriting. Um but yeah, I think My Old Man is definitely my favorite Joni Mitchell song, and I think it's the second song on the album. The album opens up with All I Want, which again is just an amazing, amazing song. Little Green is another just phenomenal song on that album. That album is just so just I don't know. It's sad and heart wrenching, but it's also just so transcendent and beautiful at the same time. Blue is an amazing album. Joni Mitchell is an amazing songwriter. I'd say probably the best folk uh, musician. Period. You know, I'd say it's her and Bob Dylan. You can't really beat those 2, even though Bob Dylan sort of went off and did his own thing. But we'll talk about him. And, so that's Blue. Blue's an amazing album. I love Blue. I love Blue to death. It took me a while to find Blue on vinyl. I shouldn't even say that. I didn't even find it. I had to order it. I couldn't find it anywhere. That's a little side note, but Blue's amazing. Blue's one of my favorites. Um, Another sad album. I have a lot of sad albums on here, but another sad album is 10. Um, and Lost in Chains. Like I said, not one single grunge band sounds the same. 10 is like it's a sad album. All the grunge bands, all the music is sad. They're all depressed. So, what do you really expect? 10 it's really probably Pearl Jam out of all the grunge bands were definitely the most classic rock sounding to me. They definitely had a lot of you can tell like Zeppelin was a big influence, and I mean like on Mike McCready was definitely influenced by Hendrix a lot. You can tell by his guitar playing. Um, and the song Alive, Mike McCready ripped out one of the greatest, what's considered now one of the greatest solos of all time. And I agree. It was just insanely good. It's probably my favorite Pearl Jam song. It's my favorite on the well, I'd say it's my favorite Pearl Jam song. It's a hit. I don't usually like hits as my favorite, as you know, but Jeremy is just so. I mean, if you know what the song's about, I don't want to get into it because it's actually pretty dark, but um, that sort of adds a whole nother layer to why I like the song. Um, but I say aside from Jeremy, I think Garden is my favorite song on the album. Uh, that's that's another really sad song. I like a lot of sad music, so Garden is just really song is powerful is the perfect word to use for Garden. So it's the same for Jeremy. Intense and emotional and powerful, like like Garden and like Alive and Jeremy and even the heavier songs like Why Go and Once. But it also has like these really sort of beautiful and um, just melodic and heart wrenching songs like Release and Oceans, and Black. Oh God, Black is love songs ever. I mean, Black is just that song is heart wrenching. Black is just one of those songs that you know I can't even describe Black unless you hear it. I mean, it's incredibly, incredibly powerful and moving. And it has a passion. The whole album has a passion, like a lot of other grunge bands. Um, a lot of grunge bands did not have the same passion that Pearl Jam had in their music. Alice in Chains, they all did, but you really can tell why Eddie Vedder is just a really soulful singer, and McCready obviously had that incredibly soulful thing. Um, but that's a powerful album. Um, yeah, those are the highlights. Probably objectively the considered the best songs in general. I mean, but definitely the best on the album. So that was number 8. Number 7 is an album that I hold near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons. Um, but the album is Making Movies by Dire Straits. Um, the album came out in 1980. It was the Dire Straits' third album. It followed up um, Communique, which was their second album that came out in 79. Um, Communique was not a good album at all. It still isn't. Probably considered, I think it's probably worst or second worst album maybe. They were trying to live up to the expectation of their first album, which is just that's a phenomenal album. I mean, especially for the time in which it came out, when punk and disco were topping the charts. You know, the Dire Straits and Mark Knopfler just sort of slid right up to the top of the charts with a style that really wasn't. It was their own thing. I mean, really, that's really all I can describe it as. And their first album was so good, did so well that they were obviously trying to replicate that with their second album. They fell short. What are you gonna do? But their third album, they sort of went an entirely um, different direction. They sort of weren't gonna rely on what they've done and start evolving as a band, and that's really what they did, and they did it in a huge way with this album. This is probably the most emotional album I've ever heard. It's like every song is pretty much a love song, um, but just Mark Knopfler's songwriting is so unique, and it totally complements the band's style, um, and I guess his style for the most part because he is the producer. Um, but it opens with Ball of Love, which is sort of this rocking, driving. It's an emotional love song, and but the the greatest side of the album was uh, is Romeo and Juliet. It's the second album. Uh, I'd say it's probably my. I mean, that one's high up there, but Making Movies is a really emotional album. I mean, it's not a sad album, but it's just really emotional. If you love somebody um, a lot, listen to that album because I can tell you that it'll make you. It feels pretty good to listen to that album when you love somebody. But then after that, um, we have "Thick as a Brick" by Jethro Tull, which this is number 7, which is the song on it. They're both 20 minutes. So the album's 40 minutes ish. I have a lot of memories with this album. Again, this is one of those albums where I remember when I listened to it for the first time, front to back. Um, and if you don't like prog rock, you're definitely not gonna like this. But I'm a huge progressive rock fan, huge Jethro Tull fan, and they're gonna come in. But song go through the whole it goes through so many, but every single change it makes, it's as the last, if not more so. Um, Jethro Tull this and Ian Anderson. I mean, he was their prime songwriter. Um, he had this just incredible, ear for just a catchy melody that wasn't, just like a generic sort of, you know, get like a War 5, something, simple. He could take a progressive thing you've ever heard, and you know, it's pretty crazy to say that a 20-minute song is one of the catchiest songs I've ever heard. But he had a great ability for that. And it's a great hard rock album, and that's the thing. It's like it goes from like this really sort of folky, sort of baroque style, thing that Tull was kind of known for, into this hard rock, thing, and then it can come back to the full section. It's just a mind blowing album, and for what for its ability to do that sort of thing so rapidly, yes, still keep you engaged for as long as it does. But I think Zurich is an amazing album. Um, the concept behind it is pretty out there. It's pretty interesting too. I don't want to get into that whole thing because I could go different ways. But after Thick as a Brick, number 5 is Destroyer by Kiss. Kiss is probably my favorite band. Now my second favorite band. It's them and Zeppelin. But Kiss is a band that's not a lot of people think of Kiss as a great band musically. I do. Kiss's music speaks to me so much more than anything else they've ever done does. And Destroyer is definitely their best studio album. If I pick, put live albums on here, I would put a live, um, where Destroyer is, but I stuck to studio albums, and Destroyer is their best for sure. Uh, Bob Ezrin was the producer on this album. This is the first album he produced with the band, and it sounds just massive and incredible. And so in the songwriting, on every album they've released prior, sort of led up to this album. And the song opens with Detroit Rock City, and then you had King of the Nighttime World right after that. All the songs are anthemic. All the songs are anthemic. Every chorus sticks with you in your head. Even the songs that aren't as big, like Flaming Youth and Sweet Pain, they're just songs you remember. And then you had Beth on the album, which is, the world's first power ballad, really, which is just, it's a short little minute and a half, 2-minute song. That's, it's a sweet little, ballad, sung by the drummer Peter Criss, who has the best voice in the entire band. I don't know why he doesn't get more tunes than he does, but that was sort of the big hit on the album. And then it closes with "Do You Love Me," which is just probably my favorite on the whole album. I mean, that's when the chorus kicks in and the guitar sort of just like punches you right in the gut, and that's an awesome song. And then 4, we got "Aqualung" by Jethro Tull again. This is Jethro Tull's sort of, I'd say, best piece of work. I'd say musically, from a musical perspective, I'd say "Thick as a Brick" better. Um, like musicianship and the technicality of what being played is definitely just song after song. It's just, sort of like Master of Reality in a way. They had these hard slow, sort of emotional type songs that are only like a minute and a half, and like the long, the title track which opens the album, Aqualung. It's probably that amazing song. If you haven't heard, listen to Aqualung, the song at least. And of course, you got some, shredding flute solos on that album, which we all like that. Um, but Aqualung, there's not really you can say much you can say about the album. Call it a concept album, but the band, as Ian Anderson has specifically stated, it's not a concept album. Stop trying to over analyze my lyrics, but you know, I like to do that. But yeah, all the musicians on that album sound great. Solos, guitar solos are amazing. Songwriting's great. Riffs are heavy. Flute is, as good as it can get. And that's Aqualung. Just an amazing, amazing album. 3 is Who's Next by The Who. Who's Next features the song Getting in Tune, which, I obviously chose to use for whatever this is. And that's probably my favorite song on the album. That's sort of really emotional, yet really, um, I don't know, it's heavy at times, and it's a powerful song. It's sort of like this it's a love song. I don't know what you'd call it, but Getting is a great song. The album, which and it ends with Won't Get Fooled Again. Album, it's a great. The song's Over, which is the ballad, and Blue Eyes, which is, I mean, that's a sad song. I mean, the chorus in that song is probably some of my favorite lyrics I've ever heard. But my dreams aren't as empty as my conscience seems to be. I mean, that's a great lyric right there. Probably favorite lyric I've ever heard. But Who's Next is probably the album that I listened to once, and my mind was blown. That was the one album that did that for me. Like, unlike any other album, it blew my mind the first time I listened to it. Every single song perfect, songwriting's perfect. All the musicians sound great. Roger Daltrey, the singer, sounds like, I don't know, just divine on the album. Like, he's killing it there. But that's Who's Next. And then the second album, my second favorite album of all time, Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan, which is, you know, I guess many people that know me might be surprised by that. Um, but that really is just like, I mean, like, if you want to talk about songwriting and you want to study songwriting, like, listen to that album, at least lyricism. I mean, because it's insane what Bob Dylan's able to do. He's such a gifted lyricist and poet. Honestly, he is. Um, and that's a really emotional album. He was divorcing his wife at the time, so obviously there's a lot of um, heartbreak on the album. And the songs are simple for the most part. It could come off as this really sort of easy, uh, sort of heartbreak album if done wrong. Bob Dylan, you as a songwriter, he could literally make anything sound so beautiful and so heartbreaking. And that's really what the whole album is. Another sad album, but yeah, you had songs like Tangled Up in Blue and Shelter from the Storm, which was probably Simplest to Fate. That's a really heart-wrenching and just sort of and sad tune. Like I said, out of all the albums on this list, definitely the best lyricism, best songwriting, best American tracks, and favorite album of all time. Um, and that would be Led Zeppelin 2. Um, I probably could have put any Zeppelin album here because I love Zeppelin, love them to death. They're my favorite band, but 2 is just the dirtiest, the heaviest, and you got songs like Whole Lot of the album opens with Whole Lot of Love. I mean, you can't really beat Whole Lot of Love. I mean, that guitar solo is probably Jimmy Page's greatest, next to it with Heaven, of course. Um, And then you got a song like Thank You on it, which is just emotional, just lovely ballad of a song that's a beautiful song. I mean, that's a super, super beautiful song. One of those, it gave me that Making Movies, Dire Straits vibe, that sort of sweet and lovely sort of love song type vibe. Thank You is a great song. The album ends with Bring It On Home, which sort of starts off with this little bluesy, quiet guitar riff and the harmonica, but like about a minute through the song, Jimmy Page just like rips the guitar and just like your heart stops. Like when you listen to something like that, it's just as hard rock can get. It's hard rock is defined, in my opinion, by Led Zeppelin too. Songs like the Lemon Song and What Is and What Should Never Be. I mean, just great, just hard rock, dirty, dirty songs. The album is raw. The production isn't great, but that adds to the album. A bad production can either honestly make or break an album. You know, like Hendrix had terrible production, even though it was Eddie Kramer. Like the production was not that great. Um, but now we're talking about him as one of the greatest to ever do it. And that's the same thing with this album. Just literally perfect front to back. Um, just hard rock, great guitar solos, every single song. Um, just Zeppelin, honestly, at their best. Not that they were ever even at a worst. They weren't. At least it's definitely just the uh, pinnacle of what hard rock is. Um, and it's Led Zeppelin. In my opinion, Zeppelin too. But any Led Zeppelin is just the cream of the crop. But yeah, those are my 20 favorite albums. Hopefully you got a good taste of what sort of stuff I'm in. Um, you know, listen to all that stuff. That's the best at the best of the best. In my opinion, of course. But you know, uh, we get to talk about some of my favorite, musicians and things like that as we go along. But yeah, and that's pretty much the episode. I got all my 20 favorite albums covered. Like I said, a lot of sad albums, but you know, that's just what I'm into. But that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. I've been Aaron Lynch. This was Getting in Tune, episode 3. All right. See you guys.